It's the Criterion. It's the Criterion. Criterion. Project.
Hey everybody, I am Conrado and welcome to the Criterion Project. This week, Rachel and I are opening our own sushi restaurant because we're talking about Criterion number 922, The Other Side of Hope. Rachel, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. I'm ready to talk about this movie because I think it's the first time in our podcast journey in which we are going to disagree heavily, it seems like, from what I've seen on your letterbox. So I'm excited because it's surely not going to be the last time. We usually have very different taste in movies, so we'll see how this goes.
Yeah. We disagreed a little bit on Grey Gardens, I would say, but yeah, this is gonna be interesting for sure.
Yeah. So before we get into it, what have you been watching in the Criterion Channel? Do you have any recommendations for people out there?
Yes. And so I decided I thought it would be fun to go through the romance section of the Criterion Channel and just start watching them. And I ended up with two sort of supernatural romances.
Okay.
Yeah, just by chance. I watched the 1942 film I Married a Witch, starring Friedrich March and Veronica Lake. And it's about it's a screwball comedy, which I really enjoy those from the 30s and 40s. And it's about this woman who is in the Salem witch trials at the beginning and is declared a witch, but she actually is a witch. But she gives her and her father give a curse to the people, to the family that condemned them. And then it zooms back up to the 1940s, and there is this man who is about to get married, and they're cursed they can never find love. And so they kind of try to play a prank on him that they are going to make him fall in love with her as a witch anyway. And the only catch is she ends up falling in love with him, which wasn't supposed to happen. And it's got a little bit of a feel of sort of Bewitched or some of this kind of thing sort of. And Veronica Lake is really charming, and it was pretty funny. And it's produced by Preston Sturges and definitely has the feel of sort of his style screwball comedy that he would do. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun little weird kind of movie. It's definitely, yeah, I enjoyed it. It's definitely got some, as far as them falling in love and stuff, it's sort of done. There's not a whole lot of depth to it or anything like that, but I enjoyed it. And so if you like that kind of thing, I thought it had enough laughs. And so that was the first one that I watched. And I think Veronica Lake was pretty charming. And this was my first movie I had seen with her. So that was fun. And then the other one that I saw, I watched the 1945 adaptation of the play Blythe Spirit. And this is directed by David Lean, who I just think is such an incredible director. He has such variety. I mean, it's interesting. I talked about a David Lean movie last month with Brief Encounter, and now here's Blythe Spirit. Of course, did Lawrence of Arabia, which is a movie I love. And I mean, it's just so different. And this was very funny, I think, with this man played by Rex Harrison, who he's newly married after his first wife passed away. He's an author, and he's writing about a seance, and so he decides to actually have one so that he can write about it accurately. And it ends up calling forth the spirit of his of his dead wife, and she just starts making everything. They can't get rid of her, and she starts making everything crazy for them and for his new wife, and I thought it was very funny. I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited because evidently they're going to be doing a new adaptation next year with Dan Stevens and Judi Dench and a bunch of British actors. So yeah,
that sounds like fun. These both sound like a lot of fun. I haven't seen them before, so maybe I'll give them a try.
mm-hmm. Yeah. If you like sort of screwball romantic comedies, I think that this was really funny. I'd actually seen the play before, but it's been a long time. Yeah, I mean, Rex Harrison, I think, is great. He's really funny at this kind of thing. I think this is a lot funnier than Arsenic and Old Lace, which I always thought was a little bit overrated. I didn't think it was that funny. This similar feel, I think this is better. So,
okay,
there you go. Mm-hmm.
All right. I have been watching a lot of silent short films, like Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd, which we have a lot of in the Criterion Channel, and having a good time with that. I saw a really good Charlie Chaplin short that I hadn't seen before. It's 45 minutes, so it's a bit of a like medium length, I guess, called Shoulder Arms from 1918, and it's basically this like the story of like what if Charlie Chaplin was in the army during World War One, and it's like it has a bunch of really cool gags. It's really funny, and it's got some inspired stunts. There's a section in which the trenches in which he's sleeping fill up with water and he can't go to bed, which is really funny, and also a section in which he dresses up as a tree in order to infiltrate the enemy, which is also really fun. So that was good. I also want to make a recommendation for a movie that has been added to the channel but is leaving on June 30th. So hopefully people will listen to it and we'll have some time to check it out, because it's one of my favorite movies. It's Hedwig and the Angry Inch, the musical adaptation of the show that was on, I guess, off Broadway back in the 90s, created by John Cameron Mitchell, and then he directed this movie adaptation, which I think is one of the best musical adaptations that we've had in I guess recent years, even though it's 2001, which is almost 20 years ago at this point. But it's really great because it's very different in structure from the show. The show is basically like a concert, and the movie totally changes that, but it works so well. And it's a story about this basically this guy who is a gay guy in East Berlin, but in order to leave because he falls in love with an American soldier, he has to transition into a woman because it's the only way that they will allow their marriage. But then things happen, and she moves to America, but the guy leaves her, and so she ends up alone, and she becomes this rock star, kind of, that this like like a glam rock sort of punk rocker girl, and it's like the story of like everything that's happening with her. It's a movie that meant a lot to me, especially when I was a teenager. I really love it. So anyone who likes sort of like rock musicals, glam rock, stories about I guess like queer issues also, give it a try. It's a pretty unique movie, and it's only gonna be there until June 30th, so hopefully you guys can catch up with it.
Do they say it on the Criterion Channel when it's leaving, or do you just read that?
So it's a little, we were talking about this online yesterday, that it's a little annoying not quite knowing how long the movies are going to be on the channel for. But I've discovered that if you scroll all the way to the end of the main page, there is a section that says leaving. Right now it says leaving June 30th, and last month it said leaving May 30th, and I assume they're going to do it every month, and then you can see all the movies that are going to leave by the end of the month. So I can give you, I just did it now, and I'll tell you that on June 30th, movies that are going to be leaving include The Virgin Suicides, Bugsy Malone, Mildred Pierce, Mulholland Drive. So they have a bunch of movies that are leaving on the 30th. So you guys may want to check it out so you can catch some of them before they leave if you've really been looking forward to any of them.
Oh, that is good to know. Yeah, because we were wondering about that yesterday with I was particularly thinking about that with some of the George Cukor ones that they're featuring right now, and how long they'll be in there.
Yeah, none of them are leaving on June 30th that I can see, but yeah, I agree with you. It would be cool if we could know that a little bit further in advance. A month is good, but maybe a little more would be even better.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to check that out. I haven't seen it. That sounds good. I mean, I love musicals, so I'll have to take a look. Yeah, so there's lots of good stuff right now on the Criterion Channel. Check out.
Definitely. Okay, so let's go into our main event, The Other Side of Hope from 2017, directed by Finnish filmmaker Aki Kaurismäki. And it's basically, how would we describe the story? Do you want to give it a try?
Yeah, it's basically about these two men. The one man ends up quitting his he sells his kind of share in this business, and he decides to invest. He wins at gambling. He decides to invest this money in a new restaurant, and then this other man who is at the beginning of the movie, you see him showing up on this cargo ship that he has the ship that he's hid in the coal, I guess. Anyway, and he is trying to get asylum as an immigrant, and so there's sort of his story, and then also his sister, who ends up getting brought over from Syria, I think. Yeah. And it's just about how these two men end up kind of helping each other and end up meeting each other and their sort of story. Is that fair explanation?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good explanation. I think, it's basically the story of two men crossing paths. One of them is the Syrian refugee trying to make it to Europe and finding asylum, and also finding his sister, like you said. And then the other guy is this sort of middle-aged Finnish dude who is going on I guess he's having a bit of a midlife crisis, right? He also he quits his job, but you forgot to say that he also is basically separated from his wife, and basically decides to change his life over. And but I think the thing that's more unique about this movie than just the plot, although I think that's also very interesting, is the style and the sort of, because it's a comedy of sorts, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit of your experience watching it.
Yeah, so I actually ended up seeing the beginning of this movie 3 times because I kept falling asleep. This movie just did not interest me. I really struggled to be invested in it. I don't know. It just, to me, it felt that the story just wasn't doing it for me, and I wasn't laughing. I don't know. If anything, I thought it was more of a drama. And once the stuff with his sister started happening, that was more interesting to me. But I don't know. I just didn't find it interesting.
I think in this case we're talking about something that will depend. The enjoyment of the movie will depend a lot with personal taste and aesthetics. How would you describe the style of this movie? I'm trying to find the right. It's very droll and it's very deadpan, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it definitely has its deadpan moments, but I wish it had almost been even more that way. I'm trying to think of. I mean, it doesn't try to really be quirky like, say, Wes Anderson. I'm trying to think of who is kind of a dry type humor that really.
Yeah, well, the movie that it reminded me of, because I just saw it recently also, and it's another movie that you don't like. It's one that's out in theaters now, The Dead Don't Die, directed by Jim Jarmusch. So I think he's a good comparison. I think also a good comparison is, do you remember when we did our 2007 episode and I had a movie, You the Living? Swedish movie that was a bunch of comedic vignettes.
Yeah, but that movie was funny. That I thought.
Yeah, I remember you liking that.
I thought that was way funnier. Just the whole scene at the dinner party in that was.
Well, that scene is a masterpiece. That is the funniest scene in the movie. Yeah, that's a great scene.
But that's definitely, that's a good comparison. Yeah, I mean, I liked this better than The Dead Don't Die, just because I thought that movie was so heavy-handed with its messaging, to even that the narration was literally explaining what you were supposed to get out of it over and over again. And I'm just like, I'm not stupid. I get what you're trying to say. Like, you don't have to tell me about commercialism in your narration. I don't know. That was very irritating to me. So at least like this movie wasn't irritating to me like that movie was. It just was, I don't know, it just wasn't interesting to me. I just kept getting really bored. And but I thought the performances were really sweet. It definitely had a sweetness to it, which I enjoyed.
Definitely.
It's not a cynical movie, which sometimes these can kind of walk that, this kind of humor can kind of walk that line too cynical and, you know, just being like, ugh, I don't, you know, not into it. But
I think that's a great point. I agree with that a lot. I think there's a lot of, I agree that this sort of style of movie with, you know, when tends to be very satiric of like, you know, the deadpan and the droll is supposed to signify how like we are all like kind of like zombies in the real world, and like people are like very petty and whatever, making light of like the issues of our lives kind of. But I feel like in this case, what Aki Kaurismäki is doing is almost the opposite, right? Because he has a lot of empathy and he's trying to show this sort of like social issue basically. So for me, this movie is a very interesting way of tackling, because a story about a refugee who comes from Syria to Europe usually wouldn't be told in this way, right? It would usually be a straightforward drama and be much more like realistic, like, you know, like handheld camera and like very follow him from the back as they walk and all their troubles, and it's very dramatic and whatever. And this is turning this into a bit of a comedy, into a bit of a I think the fact that for me it was so funny and so light on its way and so sweet made it colored the issue in a way that I wouldn't have expected, and I really appreciated that. I think the sweetness is it's a great asset for the movie. I will agree with you that I can see totally why it's truly a matter of taste, because, you know, for you it was boring. For me, it was kind of hilarious. But I understand that a lot of people will watch this or could watch this and be like, what the hell is going on? Like, is this supposed to be funny? But I just thought everything was, I don't know, it just tickled my funny bone somehow. Like, when they are, I don't know, just at the beginning when he is breaking up with his wife and he puts the wedding ring on the table. I just thought that was just funny in itself. It's like, and it's also telling us a lot about what's going on. And then, I don't know, it's just done with such a lack of sentiment or like emotion, you know what I mean? It's so deadpan that I think I love that kind of thing. So I think that's why I was super into this. In terms of it being funny, I feel like a lot of the things that they say, like the woman who wants to go to Mexico to practice the hula and things like that, I thought were hilarious. And the scene at the restaurant where they try to make it a sushi place, I think that is the centerpiece almost of the comedy in the movie.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't know. I was actually like more because I think I felt like when you described that scene, in our best of the year, I felt like you talking about it was funnier than the actual scene. Like when you were talking about it, I was laughing, but watching it, maybe I was just a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. Like,
I mean, it's so understated in the movie itself, right? Everything is so understated, and I think that's a little bit what he's saying, right? I feel like he's showing this, like the contrast between this, like totally dull, understated life in Finland, compared like with this whole drama, and that this guy has lived in Syria, and how it's a totally different environment, and the struggles of these two men are on totally different levels, right? Like one is trying to open a silly restaurant, and the other is trying to like survive.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I liked it better once the sister got involved, because I thought their relationship was really sweet and interesting, and you could tell that she had mixed feelings about getting sent get going on this I don't know, going back to her brother. You could tell she had some mixed feelings about the whole situation, and I thought that was interesting. It kind of reminded me a little bit of, have you ever seen The Band's Visit?
Yeah, back when it came out a long time ago, but yeah, I remember it. It's the band that comes to visit Israel, right? Or Egypt, or something like that.
Yeah. And so you have the different, the different culture clashes and different things, and that movie definitely has some boring parts, that's for sure. But it also has a sweetness to it, and it does have some quite funny scenes. I don't know, it reminded me a little bit of that.
Yeah, I can see that from what I remember. Yeah,
I thought that Khalid was the best character in the movie.
He is a refugee guy, and I would agree with that. I think he is very. I mean, I don't know. He was very endearing to me. Watching it again, I had forgotten in my mind that they crossed paths way earlier in the movie than they actually do. I remember them getting together and Khaled working at the restaurant much earlier. But when I was rewatching it this time, I was like, most of the movies, they're just apart, and they really just get together in like the last like 30 minutes or so, or even less.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. Although I feel like everything that happens in the restaurant for me is very funny. Just like when the inspectors come and the also the past owner who didn't pay them any money, and then all the employees lining up with the new boss to try to get some advances. I don't know. I just found that very funny for some reason. I guess it's just my kind of humor.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing, because if you look at a movie that I think is really funny that a lot of people think is really boring, is Napoleon Dynamite. A lot of people don't like that movie, but I think it's hilarious, and I love Napoleon as a character, because I think his life is actually really terrible, and yet he finds things to be really excited about, and I think his dance at the end is really actually triumphant and sweet, and I love that movie. But other people think it's super boring, and so I get it, but
yeah, I think we all have our pet, taste things, or those sort of like kinds of stories or kinds of things that speak to us. I think, hearing you talk about Grey Gardens last month and now talking about Napoleon Dynamite, I think you definitely are very interested and respond to stories of people making the best of their situations. How Napoleon and little Edie kind of like try to find ways in order to like just cope with everything that they have going on in their lives. And just like I feel like I have a sort of almost like an innate response to stories that are told in this way, like Other Side of Hope, or like even Dead Don't Die, or like you said, like Wes Anderson movies, in which the characters are so understated and reserved, right? It's that kind of humor that speaks to me in in many ways, not just because I think it's funny, but I think I relate with that sort of understateness and that sort of like, I don't know. I feel like maybe I just have a fantasy of hoping that the world. I feel like in a lot of these movies, the characters just say what they mean straight out and are not like dancing around the bush. And maybe I'm just like hoping of a world in which, for me, it would be much simpler if people just told me straight to my face what they're trying to say instead of me having to decode everything they're saying sometimes. And that's also funny because it's obviously not how the world works. So I think to me, it's really funny to see people just like straight up say things that they wouldn't usually say.
Yeah, and I can like that too. Like, one of my favorite movies of all time is Juno, and that's very much her character. She just says whatever's on her mind. But it's a weird thing. It's hard to quantify what makes us laugh, and what makes us kind of invested in a story. It's a tricky,
definitely.
It's a weird thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would have liked this movie a lot more if it had been a drama, because those are the parts that were more interesting to me, particularly once the sister comes involved. But especially that middle section I found very rough.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we move on to our next section, and the question, one of the two questions that we ask every time we do this podcast. What do you think makes this a Criterion film?
It's I've been thinking about that, and I mean, it's certainly very relevant and has a bit of an indie charm to it, but I don't know if it really feels a ton like a Criterion release to me, just in because even in the The Dead Don't Die has like, I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes a Criterion, because it has, even though I didn't enjoy it, it has a quirkiness to the filmmaking in the sort of the style and like breaking the fourth wall and stuff like that. I don't think this does. And there wasn't really anything in the filmmaking itself that screamed Criterion to me. It felt pretty basic as far as the cinematography and the other stuff. And so I guess it's just that deadpan is why it's a Criterion. I don't know. I kind of wondered why it, aside from being a foreign film, I don't know. I kind of wondered why it ended up being a Criterion.
I think actually I'm almost on the opposite end of you. I think the reason why it's in Criterion is because Aki Kaurismäki has such a specific point of view and specific style to his filmmaking. I think what you are seeing as basic, I think, is kind of intentional, or I think he has a very deliberate way of staging things in sort of like long and kind of like a little bit slow shots and very, I feel like inelegant movements a lot of the time, like things that look silly that another director would almost like put it like a different scene or a different cut in order to make things look a little cooler, a little smoother. He just lets them play out in real time so that you can see stuff that you like, like people opening drawers and taking stuff out of them that usually you like cut to a close-up of the drawer so that it's much more dynamic, and he just like sees you look at how silly the movement is of just like doing mundane things. And I think that is part of a little bit of the comedy that I find in it and in his style, and I think that is why he is a Criterion level director, because he also has such a specific way of doing his movies. I think it's a recurrent thing for him to do this sort of like deadpan silly comedy and mix it with very melodramatic arcs. I've seen some of his other movies that are on the channel right now, and they always have this sort of like very sentimental, sometimes very tragic events towards the end of the movie. And despite being very silly, very like droll comedies.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. Maybe I'm too colored by the fact I just didn't enjoy it. So maybe, but I don't know. I just felt like it seemed very perfunctory to me. I didn't see anything that was like really cinematic about it, but I don't know. I mean, yeah, obviously they did, so they made it a Criterion. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, it could also be the fact that there's been other directors. He started working way back in the day, like in the 80s or maybe even 70s. But I think there's a lot of directors that are popular now that have been influenced by him. Like, I feel like Wes Anderson's style has a lot to do with this sort of thing, and also like Yorgos Lanthimos and something like The Favorite or The Lobster and things like that have some of his quirkiness to them.
Oh, I can see that. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So keeping that in mind, where do you think this? What would you rank this in our pretentious scale, which is where we decide if a movie is? Where does it fit in our expectations with something being either pretentious but worth it, or is it like just too pretentious, so like give it a pass, or is this something that it's not pretentious, or what do you think?
I didn't think it was pretentious, but I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 10 as far as my score, my ranking. But I didn't think it was pretentious really at all. I don't see anything pretentious about it.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I think there's like a specific artiness to it, but I think also it kind of undercuts everything that could be pretentious about it, either with the humor or either with like being very not like going into super dramatic or super like you were talking about, the dead don't die. Like it's never like super underlining its message or like giving like big speeches or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
So,
no, never.
Yeah, so I think I would put it in a pretty unpretentious point in the scale. I guess the part where we divide ourselves is I would say it's worth watching, and you maybe not so excited about it.
Yeah. It wasn't for me, but I can see another point of view for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say if you know that you like this kind of humor, if you feel like you have this particular unconventional funny bone to yourself, then give it a try. And I mean, it's a very sweet movie regardless. So if it sounds at all interesting to you, I would say watch it. It's not that long and it's very sweet. And in my opinion, it's very funny. And then you can make up your mind for yourself.
Yeah. It is really interesting because they always give, all the big awards for the most part, to the dramas. Mm-hmm. But I think it's way easier to make someone cry than it is to make them laugh. It's so... Mm-hmm. It's so hard.
It is hard, but it is also very, very, very subjective, right? Even more so than drama. So I guess maybe they're like dividing themselves, just last year, like everyone who I could count on both hands, like as many people that really loved The Favorite and thought it was hilarious, and people who like totally didn't get it and were like, what's going on here,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And
very true.
So... Yeah. So why don't you tell us what you're going to pick next time, since it's your time to make
Yes. So it's going to be really fun, actually, for me. So we're going to do Room with a View, the adaptation by Merchant Ivory of the E.M. Forster novel. And it's going to be fun for me because I got to pick this month for July for the book club I'm in. And this was my pick for the book. So I'm going to be kind of hosting, if you might say, discussions on both the book and the movie. So that's going to be a fun experience. And I love both. I love Ian Forster's writing. I think he was great. And I love this movie. And it has what I think is one of the great kisses in all of moviedom.
Oh, okay. Very exciting. So we're going to have a little bit of double dipping on your part. I Yeah, that sounds really like a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to hearing what people say in your book club. I haven't read the novel, and I've actually haven't seen the movie before, so, but I'm very excited because I really like Howard's End and The Remains of the Day, which are other Merchant Ivory collaborations. And Howard's End was also an Ian Forster novel. So, yeah.
And another novel that I love and movie, also, and also that was Merchant Ivory. So, a great team, and this one's a little more, I think, escapist than either of those movies, but it's great, and it has a very early Daniel Day-Lewis performance that's a lot of fun, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, and I do love some romantic Daniel Day-Lewis, which he hasn't really done that much in recent. I mean, he did Phantom Thread, but that's kind of like a little bit of a twisted romance. But like The Age of Innocence or like My Beautiful Laundrette, movies like that he did when he was starting out were very romantic, and I think he's really good at those roles.
Yeah, in this one he takes a small role and really makes it stand out quite a bit. So it's really good, and you got Maggie Smith, who's always amazing, and Helena Bonham Carter. So I really enjoy it, and it'll be fun to talk about for sure.
All right, very exciting. So join us next month for A Room with a View.
Yes, it is really interesting because they always give all the big awards for the most part to the dramas, but I think it's way easier to make someone cry than it is to make them laugh. It's so hard.
It is hard, but it is also very subjective, right? Even more so than drama. So I guess maybe they're like dividing themselves, just last year, like everyone who I could count on both hands, like as many people that really loved The Favorite and thought it was hilarious, and people who like totally didn't get it and were like, what's going on here,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And
very true.
So yeah. So why don't you tell us what you're going to pick next time, since it's your time to make
Yes. So it's going to be really fun, actually, for me. So we're going to do Room with a View, the adaptation by Merchant Ivory of the Ian Forster novel. And it's going to be fun for me because I got to pick this month for July for the book club I'm in. And this was my pick for the book, so I'm going to be kind of hosting, if you might say, discussions on both the book and the movie. So that's going to be a fun experience, and I love both. I love Ian Forster's writing. I think he was great, and I love this movie, and it has what I think is one of the great kisses in all of moviedom.
Oh, okay, very exciting. So we're gonna have a little bit of double dipping on your part. Yeah, that sounds really like a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to hearing what people say in your book club. I haven't read the novel, and I've actually haven't seen the movie before, but I'm very excited because I really like Howard's End and The Remains of the Day, which are other Merchant Ivory collaborations, and Howard's End was also an Ian Forster novel. So,
and another novel that I love and movie, also, and also that was Merchant Ivory. So, a great team, and this one's a little more, I think, escapist than either of those movies, but it's great, and it has a very early Daniel Day-Lewis performance that's a lot of fun, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, and I do love some romantic Daniel Day-Lewis, which he hasn't really done that much in recent. I mean, he did Phantom Thread, but that's kind of like a little bit of a twisted romance. But like The Age of Innocence or like My Beautiful Laundrette, movies like that he did when he was starting out were very romantic, and I think he's really good at those roles.
Yeah, in this one he takes a small role and really makes it stand out quite a bit. So it's really good, and you got Maggie Smith, who's always amazing, and Helena Bonham Carter. So I really enjoy it, and it'll be fun to talk about for sure.
All right, very exciting. So join us next month for A Room with a View.
Yes.
And in the meantime, I guess we'll have to tell people where to find us.
Yes. So yeah, you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media and iTunes and on YouTube. And if you're listening on iTunes, you can give us your ratings and reviews. Really appreciate that. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I'm also available on Rotten Tomatoes, so that's pretty fun.
Great. And if you want to find me, you should probably go on Twitter and search for Coco Hits New York. And you can also follow me on Letterboxd at Conrado Falco is my name.
Great. All right. Well, great. Well, this was really fun, and it's always interesting. It's interesting when we agree. It's also interesting when we disagree. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So this was a lot of fun, and let us know what you think of The Other Side of Hope. What kind of comedies make you laugh the most, and what do you think of a sort of a deadpan type of humor? Let us know. That would be really interesting, and yeah, and we'll look forward to next month.
Absolutely. See you next time.
Okay, bye.
Bye.